All righty, welcome back to Sell Ready Podcast. Look, guys, 87% of businesses that go to market never actually sell. So today we're going to talk about why and what separates the businesses that do. So welcome with Sell Ready with Joshua Meltzer. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me be here. It's a pleasure to talk about this.
Yes, yes. So I'm a bit interested in, of course, I want to start off with getting to know you a bit more, Joshua. So tell me a bit more about your story. Like, how did you get where you are today?
All right, that sounds good. I am a business broker. I've been doing this for about 5 years, and before that, I was in the financial services business. And my partners and I actually sold our business to Roll Up, and I stayed with that company for a few years. And then I looked around to see what I really wanted to do, and I like what I call the business of business. And so I kind of fell into the business brokerage world after looking at franchising and business brokerage and a couple of other things. I started off strictly as a business broker, working with Main Street and lower middle market companies. I decided pretty quickly that companies really needed help, so I did extend my practice into some exit planning, trying to connect with companies a little before they were ready to sell or before they thought they were ready to sell to try and help prepare them for a sale. Because, as you know, a lot of businesses that think they're ready to sell aren't ready to sell. There's a lot of things that a business should do before they put themselves on the market.
Yeah, and I would love to deep dive into those things. There's a lot of things that businesses should do before they put themselves on the market, but a lot of business owners don't know what are those things that they need to do to best prepare. But first, I want to let's take a step back here and walk me through the journey of your first exit. You right? So walk me through that journey. What role did you play? How did it go? And by the way, congratulations.
Thanks.
That's amazing. Yeah, walk me through the experience.
Well, that was several years ago. My partners and I started a business which kind of came together because my dad and I had a little retirement plan, administration, financial planning business, and he wanted to retire. So we merged with another business that was similar to ours. And at that point, we had about 10 employees between the two companies. And lo and behold, 17 years later, we had 200 employees. And we were approached by a number of companies, including some private equity company that was trying to execute a roll-up, put together a whole bunch of financial planning companies and companies in that space. And we negotiated with them and eventually came to agreement on price and terms, and had a number of years of work we had to do between the time we sold and the time we were released from our non-competes and everything else.
Yeah.
And so, it was a really interesting experience because we went through a number of phases after selling the company. The roll-up decided it was going to go public, so we had to change our accounting system around, and we had to put in place a whole bunch of financial controls that small businesses aren't really familiar with and don't really know about in order to move towards a public IPO. So it was an interesting process. And then years after that, I became a much smaller cog in a much bigger machine. And, I decided that I liked small businesses and working with small businesses. And so several years after the exit, I went off on my own.
Okay. Okay. Cool. And so walk me through those experiences. I know you love working with small businesses now, right? They're small businesses. They all have their own unique struggles, their own unique situations, and and it's a lot different than a business that's operating at that 200 employee mark, slated to go public. It's a lot different of an experience that these small businesses might be handling. But I think foundationally, infrastructurally, there's still a lot of things that small businesses may not be taking into account, right? Let's dig a bit deeper into what those things may be. Is it the financials, or is it the founder dependency? What are the biggest problems that you're seeing with these small businesses that you're working with today?
I think you hit the nail on the head there. The two biggest issues, or the three biggest issues, are financial reporting. A lot of small businesses grew up from, owner only to 1 or 2 employees to 10 employees to 20 employees, and they still run the books the same way. A lot of them don't have a CFO in place, and the owner kind of does the books on the weekend, or the owner's spouse does the books. When they graduate to a bookkeeper, there's some discipline that is brought into it, and that helps a lot when they go to sell it. Owner dependency is another big problem. I always like to ask the vacation question when I go to uh, to take on a client to help sell their business. I ask them, can you take a vacation for a month? And when you come back, if you haven't had contact with your business, is it going to be running fine? And small employers, they can rarely say yes, that the business will be running fine if they take a vacation for a month. If they
Yeah.
say yes, then it's a great business to sell
Sure.
because there isn't such a dependency on the owner. They have a good second line team, good management team, and that bodes well for a sale. The other thing that small businesses typically have an issue with is concentration risk. A lot of small businesses have 1 or 2 really big clients and a whole lot of smaller clients. And when it comes to selling that business, buyers are really skittish about the risk of the 1 or 2 big clients leaving. And, it takes a while to get over that hurdle sometimes when you're trying to sell a business.
100%. 100%. Yeah, and I can completely agree. Is that the concentration risk? It like most times I hear the M&A advisors you know talking about how important it is to decrease from owner dependency, but like you stated, hey, it can also be just a concentration of clients. It can also be a dependency on a specific team member.
Yeah. In addition to that, it can be, dependency on a specific supplier. I've
Yeah.
run into situations where, a small business gets 90% of its product from one supplier, and, that can be a problem, especially if the supplier is overseas. Something could disrupt that very suddenly, and the business could be in trouble.
Yep. And all dependencies do is create risk, right?
Right.
So, and when someone's buying, and I want to hear from your perspective as a broker, when someone's looking to purchase a business or entity, what are those factors? Of course, like I know risk really does play a part into this. But what are those factors? So then, one, you can command a higher multiple, but you can actually even have someone interested in buying your business in the first place. How can you help someone like one of your clients push them across that finish line?
Yeah, I think it's for small businesses, especially owner operator businesses, it's really a question of how well the potential buyer gets to know the owner. And it's kind of a courting situation where the buyer has to court the owner and the owner has to court the buyer. They have to get to know each other. There has to be some level of trust between the two of them, and they have to be able to work together for a while because in a lot of small businesses the transition could take 30 days, or it could take 6 months, or it could take a year, depending upon the type of business and the information that has to get transferred, and potentially the relationships that have to get transferred, whether they're relationships with vendors or relationships with clients. That takes a while. And it's a matchmaking process, putting the right buyer with the right seller. There are larger companies where private equity is involved, and a lot of times they'll want the seller to stick around for a year or 2 or even 5 years to grow the business, and potentially, the sale will be not the whole business the first time, but, there'll be a second chunk of equity that gets taken out as long as targets are met over the course of several years, and sometimes that helps to reduce the risk that the buyers feel because the seller is still, holding a big chunk of the ownership of the business, and their second bite at the apple is dependent upon performance.
100%. Is there a specific type of business that you typically are helping, broker or
I'm kind of a generalist. I stay away from restaurants, food service and that kind of thing, but I've been both with service businesses and product businesses. I sold a toy store last year, and that was a really interesting experience. I never knew there were so many toy vendors, but there are hundreds. And, I saw the lawn care business, and that was interesting because I, never knew there were so many facets to lawn care, taking care of all the things that go with it. There is a lot of commonality. You have to deal with employees, you have to deal with vendors, you have to have books and records that are well kept. And it really helps if you keep personal stuff out of the business stuff. There are a lot of small business owners who combine a lot of their financials between the personal and the business. And when it comes time to sell the business, we have to untangle that, or else a buyer doesn't really know what they're buying.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. And yeah, a buyer needs to know what they're buying. It has to be like a very like clear. The clarity has to be there. I mean, you can only have clarity is if you have some sort of separation in that. And how so if someone's in the process, I know you help sell the toy store. I would love to kind of hear a little bit more about that because I'm sure that there's like you said, there's so many vendors. That I know that was like a situation getting that person organized and present to sell. I want to take a step into that in a second here, but to dig a bit deeper here with like regarding valuation, like how do you think buyers are like actually valuing companies today that they weren't maybe valuing maybe a few years ago?
I think it depends a lot on the size of the business. If the EBITDA or seller's discretionary earnings are down below a $500,000, then it's kind of a multiple of seller discretionary earnings. And it's kind of capped off at what the banks will provide for financing, what the business will cash flow at, because obviously, in order to sell a business to an individual, there has to be enough cash flow to provide debt service for whatever needs to be borrowed to buy the business. Plus, there needs to be enough money for a living wage for whoever buys the business. So that kind of caps off the multiples that can be paid. If the business is above $1 million in EBITDA, you have a new group of people who step in as buyers, and those are kind of self-funded searchers or private equity funds or family offices that can actually pay more than the cash flow would support, based on potential future growth in the business. And so the sales are a little bit different. If the EBITDA is over $1 million, the multiples kind of expand. So size really does matter. The multiple for a very small owner operator type business might be 2 or 3 times seller discretionary earnings, but for a business with $1 million in EBITDA with a good chunk of recurring revenue, it could be 4, 5, 6, 7 times EBITDA. So it's kind of different multiples for different types of businesses.
Yeah, understood, understood. And so, yeah, that takes me back to the toy store here. So walk me through that process. And you're a broker, right? You're not coming into the business and helping them like fix their entire life, fix the entire business. You're in the place of like, hey, show me what you have. Let me see if I can find a buyer for what you're looking for. But
Right.
when you walk into this toy store, not like figuratively, I don't know if you ever went there,
I
but
did. I walked in, I bought some things. They have good
okay,
stuff.
okay. You walked into the toy store, you got to see underneath the hood from this business. What were like the first things that you were like really processing? You're like, okay, I can find this guy a buyer or this gal a buyer immediately, or this thing needs some work.
Yeah, the toy store actually worked very well because the woman who owned the toy store was a very good business person.
Uh,
She had the financials organized pretty well, and she had been in the business for 15 years or so before she sold it. So it was a pretty well-oiled machine by the time I came along. The financials were in good shape, but they weren't in the shape to present to a buyer. So I have to kind of take the financials, the P&L, balance sheet, tax returns, and format it into kind of a style and a presentation that is more like a brochure or a sales piece for a buyer. Also have to reformat the financials and take out any personal stuff from them and restate them a little bit. So when the bank looks at them, the bank knows what it's financing. So there's some work that goes on there, and depending upon how good or bad the owner was with the financials, it's more or less work. The toy store was actually pretty good. The toy store has some seasonality issues, and we have to talk about that with a potential buyer because toy stores obviously make most of their money in November and December, a little
mhm.
bit in January, and the rest of the year is almost break even. So timing matters a lot when they're going to buy it. We had to talk about training because the buyer had to have enough time before the Christmas season came along in order to meet the suppliers and order the toys for the upcoming Christmas season. So, it was interesting for the timing. We also had to come up with a way to discount gift cards because there were gift cards that had sold in the last 10 years. And as you know, everybody doesn't redeem their gift cards, within a month of when they're sold. There's some gift cards that are outstanding 10 years. What's the probability that that is going to get redeemed versus the probability that a gift card sold last year is going to get redeemed, a lot higher probability. So we had to come up with, we negotiated kind of a formula to figure out how much was going to get transferred for the gift cards that weren't redeemed yet. So there were a lot of little pieces to it, things that you don't think about until you go to sell the business.
Yeah, yeah, and okay, so the first thing I'm hearing here is like you as a broker, of course, you're always doing this, but I know business owners don't think about this too much. But the first thing you did was how can we curate and communicate the story of this company,
Right.
right? So you're looking at the financials, you're looking at okay, everything that you have underneath the hood, you're looking at the engine, you're looking at everything you have, and you're figuring out how to best articulate and communicate it to a potential buyer. Now, Joshua, when we're talking about communicating a story to a potential buyer, obviously that shifts depending on who you're looking to buy to, right? Are we talking about a strategic buyer? Are we talking about a family office, right? And so, can you communicate to me how does your process shift in story communication depending on who you're talking to?
Yep. If it's usually the difference is the amount of time and effort we spend communicating the financial aspects of the business versus the story aspects of the business. We sold it to somebody who was in the neighborhood, who had gone to that store before, who had small kids, and the buyer was really interested in the story, in supporting the neighborhood, in continuing the legacy of that business kind of the way it was, and in growing it. And so the story was really important. The story of how the store started, and the story of what it sells and who it serves and what they can do with it. That was a very important piece of that business because we were selling it to an individual. If we were selling it to a family office, it's more about how it can be managed remotely or how it can be managed by, a manager who is not necessarily an owner, and how the numbers work out and what the levers are to increase the revenues and increase the profits. So the story changes from a story of the business to a story of the financials, depending upon who the buyer is in a lot of cases.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And the family offices, they're going to be more technical of a buyer who's going to really care about, hey, tell me the numbers, make these numbers make sense to me.
Yep.
Where that more strategic buyer is more so like they're emotionally attached to the sale as well. The numbers have to make sense regardless of what type of buyer you need, but the way you position the sell is going to differ depending on who you're selling to. So I love the way that you express that. So, Josh, like, by the way, can I call you Josh? I
Sure.
didn't. Okay.
No problem.
So, Josh, how many people do you have to like turn away out of the transactions that you can do like a year that because they're just not prepped, they're not ready to actually to sell, and they need to get a few more things in order. Like,
There's some there are kind of two groups of those businesses. They're businesses that are never really going to be able to sell. They're just not marketable businesses, and they're businesses that need to get fixed up. And then there are businesses where the owner is just so far out in left field as far as what they think the business is worth, and they just won't listen to reason that it's not worth me wasting their time or them wasting my time trying to sell it if they're not interested in listening to a reasonable valuation. You know, Small one-person businesses that are, owner only type of businesses where it's project-based income is probably not really saleable, like my business. I'm a sole proprietor, business broker. I have clients, I service those clients, I have a good reputation, so that's worth something. But my business is not really a saleable business. I wouldn't want to try and sell my business. And there are small businesses where I have nursed them along, because they want to sell for a big number, but right now their income and their profits are too small for the number they want to sell for. So I've been nursing along this property management company for 4 years, and when they started, their income was about $500,000 a year, and now it's about $2.5 million a year. And now it's time to take a look at putting financials together to see if they can potentially sell it for what they want to sell it for. And over the course of those years, we've made sure that the financials that they've had every year don't have personal stuff in it and are clean financials done professionally, and so that they're going to be ready to sell when the time comes to sell. Like I say, I tell owners that, if they want to sell within the next 3 to 6 months, we're going to put lipstick on the pig. But if they want to sell in, 3 to 5 years, we can potentially change the course of the business and make it a lot more saleable instead of just present it better.
Yeah, yeah, understood, understood, and I love the lipstick on the pig analogy. But yeah, okay. And so you have experience when it comes to exit readiness. A business not ready, so when they come to you, you are still coming in. And what aspect are you coming in and like, helping these businesses out, like the example you just gave over the 2 years, and then increasing, their revenue and their valuation over that's time span. How are you coming in and advising in that moment?
Well, the first thing I like to do is come in and take a look at the financials and do a valuation for them so they know what the business is worth, and then we talk about the things that will make the business worth more when they go to sell it. The fact that, if they don't have a second in charge who could take over the business operations over the next couple of years, they need to develop somebody to step into that role so that when they sell the business, there's somebody there to potentially run it. They need to make sure the financials are clean, and they need to put in place processes in order to make sales. A lot of small businesses, the owner is the rainmaker, and they haven't put together any other ways to sell things. They also don't have processes and procedures that are written down. It's all in somebody's head. So, it's time to do that. So I kind of periodically push them along, redo the valuation every 6 months or every year, and talk to them about how the business is coming along, and try and push them in the right direction to increase the value of that business.
Understood. Yeah, understood. It's I love to understand because you're kind of in a unique spot. You're not just a business broker, but you also kind of help out with the exit planning. And some business broker may like help push them along the way, but you seem to do it in a pretty unique way. Like with us at So Ready, we're more so like implementation partners, right? So you're like, hey, look, these are all the holes and gaps that we found, and then we're actually coming in and helping them like secure those holes and gaps. And whether that's streamlining their processes and helping them and decrease founder dependency, or whether that's the client concentration that we spoke about, streamlining those marketing and sales channels, like you communicated as well. That's more so like we're like boots on the ground, but it's very important, like Joshua stated, to have that consultative aspect from someone who's like really taking a deep dive into your numbers, getting the valuation, and letting you know that like the levers that you need to pull in order to increase your value or your multiples. So
Yeah, I kinda help them see the picture and see who they might need to hire to help them do these things. I'm not a value growth specialist myself, so I'm gonna try and find them somebody who will do that, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm not gonna restructure their corporate structure to increase their post-tax, post-tax return on the sale. I'm not gonna analyze the QSBS, the qualified small business stock aspect of it, but I'll push them towards an accountant who might help them do that in order to reduce the potential taxable gain. Just kind of an umbrella overseer that kind of helps them along. And I think that's why sometimes I get clients versus somebody just selling to a buyer. There are a lot of there are a lot of companies out there where the owners don't want to hire a broker because they don't think it's worth the money, and they just want to go direct and try and find a buyer for the company, but they're not really ready yet. And the buyers out there are out there looking for businesses to buy now. I'm looking for businesses to sell, but I don't need to sell it next week. I can sell it 2 years from now or 5 years from now. And so sometimes a business that's not yet ready to sell should engage me instead of trying to sell it now themselves, because they won't do as well, and the buyers are going to get frustrated. They're going to start asking for things from the owner that the owner's not going to be ready to provide. Once I start advertising the business, I want all that stuff ready to send out in the email or put on a deal room site so that the buyer can find it all ready to go. I don't want to be struggling when the first buyer comes along to put a set of financials together that makes sense. It's got to be there already.
yeah, understood. So, look, as we wrap up here, I always like to, because we ask every guest, every founder these questions, because we're actually building a data set about how high level operators think. So, we want to get into our segment called the operator stack. It's only 5 questions, they're not super hard. And some of them
Okay.
might sound a bit redundant here because you're so thorough, Josh. And so, I love this, but I want to run through these questions pretty quickly. Are you ready? You
Sure.
just, first thing that comes to mind. Okay.
Say again.
I said, you'll just spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay. I'll
Alrighty.
try.
All right. So when you're making a high stakes decision, what's like one principle, one framework that you rely on?
When I'm making a what decision?
High stakes.
High stakes.
Yes.
I wanna most of the high stakes decisions are sell or not sell or is the price right? Are we ready to make a deal? And I think trust really plays a large part in that, decision. You have to look across the table and see the person you're dealing with, and there has to be a high enough level of trust to be able to make that decision.
Yeah. Okay. I love it. I love it. Now, what's the most common bottleneck that you're seeing consistently that prevents companies from selling or scaling effectively?
Selling, I think the biggest problem is unrealistic valuations. People have heard rumors about what their business should be worth, and they think it's worth that or more, and they don't pay attention to numbers. They get emotional about something they built for 15 years, and they inflate the value of that. I had a diner that I went to talk to, and they said, "Well, I paid $100,000 for my diner 20 years ago. So shouldn't it be worth $500,000 now?" And, the question I ask is, are your profits any more now than they were 20 years ago when you bought it? And no, the profits are about the same. Well, then why should it be worth more?
Yeah.
Well, because I worked there for 20 years. That's an emotional response, not a numbers response.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I'm hearing this consistently. Like the number one reason why these companies aren't selling is, well, one, you just are asking for more than what it's worth.
I think that's true.
Yeah. Okay. So, what about when evaluating leadership teams? What's one signal that tells you that someone's A plus talent?
Off the top of my head, I think A plus talent hires A plus talent. So I think indicator of somebody who's really talented, I you could tell by looking at the people who are working for them and how talented they are. Somebody who's not talented is gonna bring in people who they can yell at, who they can make do what they wanna do. People who are really talented, who are A plus talent, are gonna bring in people who are gonna question them and who have the capability to become A plus talent themselves.
Yeah, I got it. Got it. And people who are always sharpening their own sword and looking to sharpen the swords around them. So, okay.
Yeah.
And if you had to double the value of a company within the next 12 months, what would you do? What would you focus on first?
That's tough. There are a lot of things, but you can't make money if you don't make sales. So I guess the first thing is bringing money in the door and then making the machine more efficient once you have brought the money in the door. But if you can't bring in more money, then you can't really make the business worth considerably more unless you are really wasting money in the first place.
Makes sense. It makes sense. Okay. Yeah. More sales, more value. Right. And of course, there's a million and one ways you can skin that cat when it comes to increasing the value of a company.
Yep,
So,
yeah.
lastly, here, what's a mistake that you see founders or executives make that cost them the most?
I in the process of selling, I think letting their emotions get in the way of logic when they're trying to make a deal, when they're trying to do a negotiation. A lot of owners really feel attached to their businesses, and they negotiate not based on the numbers, but based on their emotion. And sometimes that's because even if the business is ready to sell, the owner's not ready to sell the business. And I've come across a number of those situations where the owner just is not emotionally ready to walk away from the business and is not ready to have somebody else be the owner. So they negotiate emotionally instead of objectively. And sometimes that's where it helps to have representation, either a business broker or a lawyer or somebody to help, take them in the other room and say, okay, we're giving you a fair offer. It may be that it's not exactly what you wanted, but don't chase them out just because you feel like they're insulting you. They're
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah. Having that, having that help so then you can, be able to, they'll be able to consult with someone when you are in a bit emotional in that moment. So, I mean, completely agree. No, thank you so much, Joshua, for, of course, going through our operator stack and, providing that insight there. I really, really enjoyed our conversation today about increasing the value of a company, what it actually looks like for a company to have all their stuff in order for them to find a buyer and learning more about, your processes. Josh, where can they find you?
You can find me at Diversified Business Advisors, Joshua at businessadvisors.us, and I'm here a little west of Boston if somebody wants to come visit.
Alrighty. Alrighty. I might need to take a trip down there. Make sure that you like, comment, subscribe. You'll be able to find us on LinkedIn. Check out SoReady.ai, and we'll see you on the next episode.